Human beings have been making things for approximately 1.76 million years. We are caught between two opposing forces. Our tendency to produce more and more stuff we're literally drowning in, but the other is our human ability to make things.
We've moved too far into just being consumers. We've forgotten to be makers. You know, in the old days, people knew how to make and fix things.
In the morning there was a pile of plastic pellets, and in the afternoon there was a toaster. And I did it, and it wouldn't have happened without me.
This was at one of those pizza things that they have. Pizza, and this was a broken pen. And I don't know what this was.
That was the back of a motor.
This hands-on, I'm not going to take the world as something you just buy, I'm going to take it as something you make. That's kind of the maker spirit.
UFO. We put the U in the UFO. Well, actually, we put your kid in the UFO because this is no cover, no minimum, no adults. You must be this high to ride this ride. Here's an example. You must be this high. Right there. That's all.
When kids see somebody making something cool, they aspire to it. There's a whole set of little things that make kids grow up thinking that it's a reasonable thing to do to make things. And I think that's going to be one of the enduring legacies of Make Magazine and Maker Faire, that we've created a new generation of makers. Dale had this brilliant idea, pitched to me in 2004 in the back of a taxi cab at our open source convention. And I said, this sounds like a great idea, go for it.
DIY is something that happens at home. It's been traditionally invisible. Maker Faire helps to flush that out. We see a lot more than we might have expected to find. Seeing people creating physical things and as opposed to digital things. We want to hack this physical world in the way that we've been used to hacking computers.
This wonderful thing that Dale did where he said being a maker is just not taking the world as it's given. That's, you know, it gives me an identity.
I began with nothing, or began with a set of raw materials, and ended up with something that, say, it was a rocket, and a rocket went up in the air, and boom, you know, I did that.
People doing crazy projects, sending up an old digital camera in a kite for aerial photography. A guy built a programmable cat feeder out of an old VCR. These are the kinds of projects that were in Make Magazine. Dale called it technology on your own time. But he had this slogan, if you can't open it, you don't own it.
When I was very young, I was in love with animation. But I found myself flowing more into sculpture because I realized that for my own temperament, the effort and time involved to make the thing actually move was about the same as the effort and time involved to make an animation. So all of these things are just a little sort of closed loop of a single instance. I never quite get to make the whole story, but I content myself with making individual frames. I've had a lot of good luck with Craigslist and, you know, secondhand. This stuff is all garbage. If it isn't sorted in a way that makes sense to me, then I'm just warehousing garbage. If things have their place and I know where they are, then this is a stockpile of valuable material. These things are treasures to me, but not if I can't access them and remember where they are. But it still gives me a lot of pleasure just to be able to have this shopping center of old crap. Have to make sure these guys don't move around or they start to butt their heads together. I found myself in an interesting sort of gap between the maker movement and the art world. The majority of people are excited about it, but they want to know, what's it for? If you have to ask what's art for, then chances are you will never need art in your home if you aren't exposed to art. You need to be made aware of what can happen when somebody really lets their imagination run.
In the 50s, a lot of this, say, tinkering existed, and it happened in isolation. You know, we have almost a phrase like the lone tinkerer. He's in his garage doing things, and no one else really knew what he was up to. But I think today we see this sort of social tinker, which is a different archetype, in a way, of someone who is doing it and is communicating to other people. Little device that makes funny noises, has knobs where you can adjust the sound. And, you know, in many ways, a good maker project has these qualities that you build something, but you get to play with it, and it engages you after you built it. It isn't something that, you know, you just build and put up on a shelf. It's something you walk around and say, hey, listen to this. And you know, one of the responses might be, hey, where do I get one of those? Well, build it yourself, and here are the instructions on how to do that. So that's a Tesla coil, and this is a small version of one. We have a Tesla coil project in the magazine, which is behind you. So it's a children's toy, and inside of it, I can't open it here, but is an Arduino that is processing. And
then we have a PR sensor. I think they have it choked off to
yeah,
be less sensitive.
but the idea is the monkey bangs the cymbals and scares the cat away. There we go.
Batteries are dead.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming up here. Glad to have you here.
The super awesome mini maker show. Yeah. So I'm Sylvia, or Super Awesome Sylvia. I'm from Auburn, California, and I make Sylvia's Super Awesome Maker Show. I was really interested and curious about how things work when I was 5. We went to the Maker Faire, and my dad and my family were very inspired about how family-friendly and how amazing the maker movement was and how educational it was. I learned to solder when I was 7. When I was 8, the Make company wanted me to make some shows for them, and I've done that ever since.
Welcome to Sylvia's Super Awesome Maker Show, Episode 3. Before we get going, let's get rid of these pesky black bars. That's better. You will be making what we call the randomly influenced finger flute, or the riff. First, take your Arduino and hook your speaker up to ground, and then to one of the digital output pins. Get your code and hook up your Arduino, and then press upload, and voila! Music. Well, sorta. On this episode, it's time to make Adafruit's alarmingly awesome monochrome clock kit.
The answer is 42.
Thanks, Monochrome.
You're welcome.
Recently, it's been an inspiration for kids, more girls, to get into science and technology and making. I hope for that to take off for girls to actually see that they don't have to be like a fashion designer. They can be anything they want to be. I taught my little sister how to solder and to, like, you have to hold it like a pencil. You have to be careful because it's very hot. And it's just very fun. I really like doing it.
That's all we got for this episode. Try and upload some new clocks. Don't give up, and get out there and make some.
I was in San Francisco and I received a phone call who politely informed me that my house was on fire. Dryer fires are the single greatest cause of residential fires. People don't know this, but if you ever leave your dryer on to finish its cycle while you go out and run errands, don't. The damage to the house was confined to the laundry room, but our entire house filled up with smoke. So we've had to move everything out. Literally every object has had to be cataloged, photographed, inventoried, cleaned, packaged up, and removed. 515 boxes of stuff. It's made it very personal. It's given me a very literal, kind of visceral feeling of how stuff tends to accumulate in our lives. It's given me an occasion to really think hard about what we have lost in the passage from the handmade one-of-a-kind into the world of industrial mass production. And the key thing that I think that we have lost is a sense of the value and meaning of objects.
So 5 years ago, I was just a guy, a dad, playing around with Lego with his children. I tried to find something fun for the kids to do. They were bored by robots, they were bored by computing, but I thought that maybe flying a plane with Lego, as an autopilot would be kind of challenging. And the fact that I could design an autopilot and a drone on a kitchen table with my children with Lego gave me chills. I recognized that this was a moment that this should not have been possible. This was 10 years earlier, it was military, industrial, classified technology. 10 years before that, it was literally impossible. So I think of the maker movement as being the web generation meets the real world. It is the tinkerers, the do-it-yourselfers, the hobbyists, the workshops of the world now working together online and using digital tools to do something that none of them could do by themselves. Let's say the first industrial revolution was the mechanical revolution, 1700s, the replacement of muscle power with machine power. The second industrial revolution was the information revolution. But this was not the creation of the computer, but rather the democratization of the computer, is putting computers in the hands of regular people so that they could do extraordinary things. And that basically replaced brain power with machine power. The third industrial revolution is just the combination of the two. The information revolution meets the mechanical machining manufacturing revolution. And the reason that's happening now is because that essential democratization moment has finally kicked in. It's not enough to invent the technologies, they have to be put in the hands of everybody, and it's that sort of mass consumerization element, the mass reach of these new technologies that makes it a true revolution, because it liberates the ideas and creativity of so many people.
It's not simply hobbyists. In many cases, we have people who are prototyping a next generation of a product.
People in general are tired of just being limited to what they see on the store shelves. They want either something that's different, or they go to the store and they don't see the product that they want. I wonder if I could just make one myself. I think that's what's made the maker movement happen in the first place. Tech Shop is a public access workshop. So you come to Tech Shop, join as a member, and you use all of our tools and equipment to make anything that you have always wanted to make. It's like a gym. Everybody has ideas of things they want to make. The problem is they don't have any way to make that project into a real thing. With a place like Tech Shop or a well-equipped makerspace, you can develop the prototype yourself. Maybe make 20 or 30 of them and put them on the market and see if they sell. See if people actually want to buy them. United States, the high school shop classes, metal shop and wood shop classes are gone, almost completely gone. People tended to think that it was the dumb people that went to shop class. The smart kids went to the other classes, all the science classes, but the dumb kids, they weren't going to go to college, so they went into shop class so they could get jobs in factories. That's actually not true at all. It really needs to be a mix.
One reason they used to shut them down was liability. Hey, kids could hurt themselves with these machines. But they were probably shut down because people didn't value that activity as much as they might have. And I think, again, we have public swimming pools. Kids can drown in public swimming pools. We didn't eliminate the swimming pools. We figured out or avoid that circumstance. So if you want to eliminate risks, I think you're eliminating creativity.
Ford Motor Company has actually partnered with Tech Shop as a way to innovate faster, better, cheaper, but also come up with products that are much more innovative than they could have done in-house.
You know, it was Bill Joy who said, you know, no matter what company you work at, the smartest people in the world are not going to work for your company.
This is why you begin to see visionary companies beginning to embrace the maker movement, because they realize that if you cannot fight them, you have to join them. Soon what you're going to begin to see is a whole ecosystem is going to come in place. Key players coming together. For example, starting with training the makers, the next generation makers, so that once you have an idea, you prototyped it in Tech Shop, you can raise more funding. The next revolution is going to be manufacturing light. This will take probably 5 to 10 years, or maybe less. But once this ecosystem is in full swing, I think it's going to fundamentally revolutionize not only manufacturing, but also industries like education, healthcare, and financial services.
So biotechnology is a relatively new thing in the maker movement. You know, making has been a lot about electronics and about things that are almost like traditional handcrafts. So the idea of a biohacker space is pretty common in biotech today, although I think outside of the biotech, even industry, it sounds a little bit futuristic.
One of the main questions I would get a lot would be, I want to know more about the science of what's happening here. Where do I go? What do I do? And there are places you can go and you can get, lectures and people talking at you. But the fun is really in doing it and in getting your hands dirty and getting to put on the gloves if you don't normally wear them and put on the lab coat and be scientists for a day or a week. BioCurious is a place where you can really harness and channel that creativity and that curiosity that you have and really explore.
This is the bioprinter. It's probably the most well-known aspect of one of our community projects. And so it's a very simple system, but it's able to actually print out bacteria, E. coli, which are an improved organism. And then these are algae that are growing for another project. And what they're trying to do, it's a mix of hardware, software, a little bit of biology, where they're trying to make a bioreactor to actually cultivate algae in a compact system that would actually be able to nourish astronauts as they go out into space. So we dream large.
I see a huge part of the impact of any kind of a makerspace being the education and letting people know what's possible. Because we all live in this technocratic, democratic society, and we've got to make these decisions about what projects do we fund and what do we not, and what do we support, and what do we want to restrict. And if you don't know how things work, you've got somebody else telling you what you ought to be doing with your money and with the rest of your life. So people, to be responsible citizens, need to have a good basic understanding of a lot of different deep technical subjects. Biohacking is this great movement, just like computer hacking. How can I play with these tools and do new things? We're doing the same thing that was happening in the 70s.
Taking biology, teasing it apart, and playing with it, looking to see why does it work the way that it does, and what can I learn about that, and how can I apply that in my own life.
OpenROV is an open source underwater robot. So ROVs aren't really new at all. They've been around for decades. You know, scientists use them to explore the ocean. What's unique about Open ROV is that it's so low cost and that we built it from mostly off-the-shelf parts.
It's got a video camera on board. It allows you to see what it sees on the surface live. So I have a first-person view from the ROV's perspective, and it's just live video. I can control it with a gamepad controller, just like playing a video game. OpenROV is completely open source and open hardware. That means that not only is the source code for the computer available online, but also the CAD files, the bill of materials, you know, all the information about how to build one on your own is available.
So the open source aspect of the Maker Movement I think is really important. There's the Arduino microcontroller, which is one of the first open source projects, and it really just enabled this broad spectrum of innovation. People were able to take that initial idea and then craft it and use it for their own, whatever they wanted to make.
Trusting in the capabilities of the many combined working together, as opposed to the old model of relying on the privileged few. So my name is Peter. I work for NanoSatisfy, and we build satellites, very small satellites. They're about 10 by 10 centimeters, filled with Arduinos and sensors, and we let students program and control those satellites for an education experience. So people have online curriculums, videos, little quizzes, an environment where they can actually develop their code and test it with the click of a button, send it up to the satellite, and then it runs on the satellite, controls the sensors and cameras off the satellite, and then they can analyze the data.
You know, I see a lot of my friends playing video games, and they spend hours and hours a day flipping bits. What I like to say is, let's get them to flip rocks. Let's make that real life.
Right now we're in the Hull City Cave, kind of near Redding, California, and the cave continues underwater, but no one really knows what's there. Once we actually do deploy this in the water and see how it behaves in a cave environment, maybe that will give us some information that will be useful for designing the next type.
He is exploring, you know, the deep sea ocean with citizen scientists. I'm exploring space with citizen scientists. We're also on Kickstarter at about the same point in time. We also raised about the same amount of money and have gone on to build our company around that concept of citizen scientists. So basically democratizing access to exploration.
3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff of the HTV on a journey to the International Space Station.
Verified satellites are deployed.
And Station Scuba, congratulations on a successful deployment of Pico Dragon, ArduSat 1, and ArduSat X.
Thank you, Shu. From the monitor, it looked really beautiful. I'm sure we captured good footage from the cupola.
For the most part right now we're just making kits, essentially compiling all the parts, putting them in a box, and shipping them out. We're not just selling these for the profit of selling them and that's all we get. There's a huge amount of research and development that we're getting out of it. So we're not only open source, we're also crowdsourced, using the community that we've developed to help give ideas back. The way that we use our Creative Commons license says that if you use our ideas, that's fine, but you also have to be open source. So if someone comes up with a better way to do something, then they should be sharing that as well.
People wonder how is it possible to have an open source model to give away your design. In our case, the business model is incredibly easy. We sell products for money. We charge slightly more than it costs. And how is it possible to avoid clones and pirates and all that kind of stuff? And the answer is it's not. As a matter of fact, our licenses specifically allow people to clone, and we're cloned within days of releasing our products. But, you know, they can't clone our community.
You know, frankly, the patent system is flawed in a lot of ways. I mean, the whole concept of being ripped off is really one of kind of the old way of doing things. If we come up with an idea, go through the 2-year often patent process, by the time that that goes through, we're already a million miles ahead. The innovation happens so quickly that, you know, you're going to be slow if you just spend your time copying.
I think if you make the analogy between, say, desktop publishing, where it was in the 80s and maybe early 90s, everybody able to publish their own, certainly flyers and things like that, but also websites and brochures and all this other type of material. You know, what you could do with your dot matrix printer on your desk was not that attractive, but you could go to Kinko's and you could use a pretty high-end laser printer or make thousands of copies or do things like that that you couldn't really do at your own desktop. So I think that's kind of what's happening with a 3D printer. You know, people might have a MakerBot printer at home, and that's, you know, fun for making stuff that you and your kids will play with. But if you really need, you know, a $250,000 3D printer that's going to do something in metal, most consumers can't have that at home.
There's a lot of different types of 3D printers. Some of them extrude plastic filament, layer by layer, in parallel layers, creating an object. That resin or material is what's used to create the object, and less is wasted. If you compare that to a CNC mill, you'll typically take a block of material and carve away the parts you don't want with the spinning in. In that case, you lose that, perhaps not to be recycled or reused.
So when you use traditional manufacturing, there are certain designs that are very difficult to do. On the 3D printing, pretty much almost anything that you design is quite doable.
So 3D printing has been around for over 25 years now, and two things have happened to make it available to everybody. One is the quality of materials is getting better, so instead of just a low-grade plastic, now you have things like titanium, stainless steel, sterling silver. And at the same time, the patents are starting to expire in some of the processes. As more patents expire for the processes, we'll see more mainstream.
3D printing has a place in a workshop, or a place in an office for a facilities manager, or a place in home, or a place in different kinds of industries, like the dental industry, because this is the lower jaw, or in the architecture industry where students are looking at different kinds of studies of wall treatments and light treatments, or in industrial design and engineering.
You know, I think 3D printing has gotten a lot of press time. 3D printers are tools. You know, it's a tool to make something. It has some really good characteristics. It has some terrible characteristics. I think it's great that people can get all excited about it, but the maker movement happens independent of 3D printing.
Is 3D printing going to replace all other methods of manufacturing? Not exactly. And the way to easily explain is, you remember when we came out with the microwave oven concept. Everybody thought the microwave will replace every single oven, and the only heating device that you're going to have in your kitchen will be the microwave. And they haven't disappeared. Because there are certain things that you want to do in the oven, and there are certain things you want to do in the 3D printer, on the microwave in this case. So I think it's an extension of tools that we're going to have, and it's going to be easy for many people to access those tools.
One that we did as an example was a collaboration with SoundCloud. Choose your favorite song, grab that waveform and print it into an iPhone case. And so that way you can always feel the memory of that sound, whether it is your baby saying your name for the first time, or your wife saying I love you, or your favorite song. Shapeways is an online 3D printing marketplace and community. It's a place where you can buy, make and sell anything you want using 3D printing. You can go there as a maker. You upload your design, you'll see how much it costs in every material we have, because we charge by the volume of material used. We print it on demand and then send it directly to your door. We then have the shops, so you can sell your designs. Then the other way you can use Shapeways is as a buyer. You can choose something as is and get it printed for you, or you can customize something. Every single thing can be different because it's printed on demand and there's no additional cost for that complexity of customization. So I think we're a mass customization factory.
After we're done printing, we have a block of powder basically in these trays. Somewhere inside of it has 200 customer parts. Because we pack so many things in there, that's why we're able to get the lower cost, provide a good price to our customers.
So in the same way we've seen digital forms change music, television and games, we're starting to see digital manufacturing change the way things are made. It's democratizing the manufacturing process by giving the tools of manufacture into everybody's hands.
Over time, with industrialization, we begin to structure the way we do business is running corporations and businesses like a big orchestra. Very top-down, very hierarchical, very rigid as well. But in the process, we kind of killed this kind of maker movement, which very much is like a jazz band. It's much more fluid, more improvised.
It's funny because I began my career as a rock journalist working for magazines like Spin and Rolling Stone, covering a lot of the great indie bands of the 80s and 90s. And when I started working on my Tinkerer's book, I realized there was an interesting connection between indie rock bands who learned to make something out of nothing and oftentimes had to create their own instruments out of old broken instruments, and has a lot in common with what a lot of people are doing in the maker movement these days. In the music scene, that ultimately resulted in bands like Nirvana becoming huge success stories. And I think in the maker scene, we haven't really quite seen the huge mainstream effect of all of this innovative activity, but it will be interesting to see what the maker movement's nirvana will be.
So Pebble's a watch that talks to your smartphone. It's similar, sort of like if you have a Bluetooth headset for voice calls, Pebble is your Bluetooth headset for email, text messages, and Facebook, Twitter, and all that good stuff. I was commuting by bike. I had a new smartphone. I didn't feel like I wanted to take it out while I was biking because I didn't want to drop it on the ground or into a canal. So I wanted to create a device that would let me see what was happening on my phone without having to take my phone out of my pocket. So I started working on a prototype. I built a small prototype myself using spare cell phone parts and an Arduino. And then I started working with some of my friends who were interested in the same project, and we got together and worked collaboratively. We were expecting to raise $100,000 on Kickstarter, and that would have helped us build the first 1,000 Pebbles. But at the end of the 37 days, we had raised over $10 million, almost 69,000 individual backers who supported us. Every day I wake up and I put on a product that I helped make, and I think it's really cool.
crowdfunding is becoming a permanent piece of the entire financial ecosystem, because crowdfunding is empowering and allowing ideas to rise to the top based on their merit, not based on a lucky connection. Essentially people voting with their dollar saying, I want this idea to exist so badly, I'm willing to put money into it right now.
Resources like crowdfunding, like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, allows a lot of these makers to take their hobbies and create companies.
What I really like about crowdfunding is before you spend those millions of dollars, if you can get a functional prototype and get people like Pebble did to be able to support it on a pre-sale basis, you have a very strong proof point that people actually will buy what you're building. So you get money, you get product market fit to make sure that people are going to buy it, you create a passionate community, and it's also a great way to attract media attention. VC would much prefer to come in and look at a project that's been successfully funded because they have the data points that people want to buy it.
One of the terms that we actually picked up from a video that was published on the site that I think resonates quite well with how we see the world is this concept of more art for more people.
I mean, if you think about it, right now there's only, I think, 300 films that make it in Hollywood, at least in the United States. In the future, millions of films will be made every year, and millions of films should be able to be viewed everywhere, and that's how YouTube has completely democratized kind of video distributions.
I always describe this as for the farmers markets, right? Where the parking lot that the farmers market exists on, where things happen, things get made.
Are you a maker yourself?
Yeah, I made a swing for my daughter this weekend, so I made that. And I made Kickstarter. You know, obviously it took a village to make Kickstarter. Everybody behind the company is certainly part of the community.
I think the biggest misunderstanding out there is that people think crowdfunding is just stranger funding. It's like a field of dreams. You put up a project, you walk away, and all of a sudden money comes and appears out of nowhere. That's not the case. It's community funding. It's raising money from your inner circle first with the goal of then raising money from your outer circles because they will help you bring it in, and then eventually Stranger Dollars Fund.
And with Indiegogo and Kickstarter and other related platforms, suddenly we have found a way to bridge that gap and start a company and find that capital. And then you hear those amazing, I mean, we had a woman there who for 6 years wanted to start a local library in Harlem. And she had talked to every single bank that she could find and was turned down over and over and over again until someone said, why don't you try Kickstarter? And now East Harlem has a bookstore because of her.
I mean, you actually do need to figure out
a company that makes a device
to shell sunflower seeds. I believe that falls into the gadget empire.
What was the name?
Riley.
Lemnos Labs is a hardware-focused incubator. Jeremy and I know each other from MIT, and as mechanical engineers, we were really frustrated that a lot of our graduating classmates, they had to choose either, do I want to be an entrepreneur or do I want to be an engineer? And if you wanted to be an engineer, you went to go work for a big, boring company. If you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you learned how to write code. So we want to, tell the makers of the world that, you can start companies involving manufacturing a physical product too.
So this is one of our consumer electronics companies, and they make a telepresence tablet stand. And this allows you to dial in and pan and tilt and actually kind of feel like you're there. So we actually use this when we're having conference calls and people can dial in and look at individual people. So this is Pantry. It's one of our startups, and they're all about making fresh food available everywhere. And so what they do is they create a great solution where all you have to do is swipe a credit card, and then you just take out whatever you want. And they are RFID experts, and so it automatically bills you for whatever you remove.
The challenge we see from current crowdfunding campaigns is that many of the entrepreneurs come at this from a software background, but they don't have a hardware background. And the challenge with hardware is it costs money. In all crowdfunding platforms, you typically will set a certain threshold that if you exceed that, you get the money, and if you don't, then there wasn't quite the product market fit. The problem comes, they would end up not setting the threshold high enough. They would get funded and have a successful campaign, but the second after the campaign closed, they just failed unless they brought on outside money and financing that they could possibly deliver the product.
And so sometimes people come to us and say, hey, I've done a crowdfunding, I'd love to join your incubator. And we're like, well, unfortunately, you priced it wrong, or you didn't account for a CE sticker. We think it's really important to coach them and be with them and invest in them really early on, and then use that crowdfunding as that final validation.
Lemnos?
Yeah.
Lemnos is the Greek island where Hephaestus, god of metallurgy, which we've sort of loosely defined as the god of technology, he actually built all the really cool things in Greek mythology, like Achilles' armor, Zeus's thunderbolt, Helios' chariot. Lemnos is the island where he had his forge and built all this stuff.
Years ago, if I had said that in 2013 everybody's going to be walking around with a telephone in your pocket, you would have laughed at me and said, look, I saw this movie somewhere of a guy walking around with a briefcase-sized telephone. You think everybody's going to do that? That's crazy. But it was almost inevitable that they would get smaller and smaller and lighter and lighter and sexier, and now everybody's walking around with a telephone in your pocket. For me, to the makers movement today is the exact inverse of what we are seeing, a small number of tinkerers in 18th century England. And somebody's experimenting with a different way of wrapping wool around a spindle, or somebody else is experimenting with a different way of getting a cylinder to seal properly in a piston, and somebody is experimenting with this and with a new method of producing a higher and more consistent grade of steel. And, taken by themselves, they look like small-scale, not very meaningful experiments, and then suddenly we have the cotton industry, and the railroad industry, and steam power, and the electrical industry, and the world pivots, and it does so in an extraordinarily short period of time.
Oncoming, attractive, useful products, well made. More and more products acceptable to the more and more exacting demands of more and more Americans. All in our own personal choices of colors, models, sizes, styles, price ranges, and types. Better made, more dependable, more nearly trouble-free than products made in any such quantities anywhere else in the world. All a part of the beauty produced so bountifully for you and for me by our American makers.
If you think about the Industrial Revolution, one of the essences of the Industrial Revolution was this idea of mass production. And the idea of mass production was that in order to get really high quality and low cost, you had to make a lot of things. The change that's going on today is we can now make things of really high quality at low volume at reasonable cost. I've been making things for 40 years or so. I'm a little bit of both. I'm both a CEO, I'm the CEO of Autodesk, and I'm also a maker. For many years I kept them separate. 10 years ago I realized the two worlds were coming together on both sides. One is the software we were making was being used more and more for makers, and on the other side I found out that in my personal work I started to use software in the design and the engineering and nowadays even in the fabrication. Oh, here's one of the things I made a lot of. I made a lot of baseball bats. So I've made these with my kids. But the whole story started out with this wood that I bought it in Oregon. The thing about wood, particularly as opposed to the work I do with metal, like with metal, I can go get bronze or aluminum or steel anytime I want. You just go buy the metal when you need it. Wood is different. Each piece is kind of unique. I just finished making a piece of furniture. I made a bed with a piece of wood that I'd carried around for about 25 years. Sometimes the wood just sits there for a while and then I eventually figure out what I'm going to do with it. Right now I'm working on a table using the 5-axis router to carve some sculptural components. These are some blanks that are glued up to do that. Here's another design that I'm working on. This is a little 3D print. Been using that a lot lately of a chair that we're going to make. And so the chair looks something like this, and here's one of the first tests of it being milled. And so this just started as a big blank, used the CNC router to do it. So I think mass manufacturing, particularly in places like Asia, as well as places like Mexico, parts of the Middle East, will continue. The capacity and capability they have is kind of unrivaled. But I think we've reached the peak where manufacturing around the world is centralized. And I think you're going to see a steady advance in localized manufacturing.
What I sometimes like to imagine is that a phenomenon such as the makers movement is not a return to a pre-industrial type of production. We're not going to abandon having cars and motorcycles and digital equipment and a reliable food supply and things like that in order to go back to poverty and starvation and privation and that. But we can think about using the technologies that we have developed over these past 200 years to return to a smaller scale of production that is marked by customization, individualization, small batch production, and things of that nature.
About 4 years ago, when I first started meeting a lot of these American manufacturers, what I noticed is that they would be doing samples for all of these much larger brands. Today, we're seeing so many of these orders that would have been sent overseas for mass production now being produced within these facilities. And initially, a lot of people go overseas because of the price differential. But now we're seeing the prices very much more competitive than they were, let's say, 20, even 10 years ago.
And we also saw that it started to become more of an on-demand economy. Was one of the real reasons why we decided to focus on American manufacturing, because now you're seeing that speed to market is becoming much more important within business. And so for instance, what Netflix did was really be able to bring movies so that it's more on demand, so that you can get it instantly or quicker.
It was important for us not just to have a directory of manufacturers, but also use this step-by-step process in which, from a basic concept to product in hand, simple as ordering pizza, where you can basically track this whole process where they'll tell you, Jake is putting on the toppings now and it's going into the oven. I would just say that now is the best time that I've ever seen for a small business to be created. Not only the access to resources, but also just the outpouring of the social.
I believe that there's a renaissance in micro-manufacturing in the urban environment. I think there's a whole new generation of manufacturers that are enabled by modern desktop manufacturing technologies, digital technologies, laser cutters, 3D printers, digital printing. All of these technologies combine together to allow small manufacturers to make things locally. Rickshaw Bagworks is a local sewing factory here in San Francisco in the Dogpatch neighborhood. Throw our door open every day and invite people in to see how we make things. Getting beyond that black box and looking back in there and saying, hey, what really goes on inside of here? It's very interesting, you notice that my sewing team, all the women are Chinese. Chinese is the first language in our factory. It turns out that here in San Francisco, the Chinese community has really been the backbone of the sewing community. The name rickshaw is actually Japanese for human-powered or human-strength vehicle. Our sort of tagline is fresh bags made daily, and actually we are using baking carts here to move some of our fabric around. This is a totally different scale. I call this micro-manufacturing. Some people call it boutique manufacturing. They first go to the laser cutter where they're cut into the shape they'll be made, and then they go through a lean manufacturing process. Product goes through a sequential process, continuous flow. It goes from one step to the next. And having your own, manufacturing is that we can design, prototype, and get into production very quickly. Local economies and global supply chains can coexist. I think the two are not mutually exclusive by any means whatsoever. Some things exist at the local level, some at the mass global supply chain level, and there are things that are hybrids as well. We have a product line here that has components that are labor intensive, that are made in China, but we bring them together here and do the customization in our factory. So it's a hybrid product. One day my kids were at school and they were going around the classroom saying, well, what does your father or what does your mom do? My son said, oh, my dad makes bags. And someone right next to him said, paper or plastic? Which is the classic line here in the United States when you're checking out of the supermarket, paper or plastic. So I am the bag guy, but I make different bags than paper or plastic bags.
The United States used to have a hot rod culture, and a lot of people spent a lot of time taking apart their cars and putting them back together again. That culture still exists, but not quite in the same way. If you open up the hood of a car today, you'll usually see a sealed plastic cover. It's very hard to tinker with your car now.
What a lot of the tools that the maker movement is providing today are really analogous, again, to desktop publishing or to some of the early software that allowed people to publish things on the web. It'd be really hard to go back to, say, the days of the TRS-80 and predict something like Facebook. So we can't really envision everything that will happen, but what we can say in more general terms is that rather than having a few large producers of common, standard almost products that we all use and know, you'll have lots and lots and lots of people making a few, thousands or tens of thousands of something that's really just what you're looking for.
So I'm Damien Leclerc. I've been working with Local Motors now for 2.5 years, and I'm looking after the business development of the company. One of our mission, which is co-creation. So this means that we're not going for the one-size-fits-all. We're building small batches of niche vehicles that are good for a local market. This is where the main difference is with large automotive manufacturers. They are building large plants to produce a large amount of vehicles, but all the same type.
So Local Motors makes cars. From the design of the car to the manufacturing of the car, everything is designed to be profitable at small scale. So if General Motors designed a car and they sold 5 or 10 or 20,000 units of that car, it would be a complete catastrophe. But if Local Motors does that, they're actually geared up to break even at that price point. Same way that bloggers have really undermined a lot of the newspapers and other media, and YouTube has changed how we consume television, and all these things are happening. You can see the same types of things happening in manufacturing.
Basically, when we do a project for us, it's fairly straightforward. Everything is open source. You can download the CAD data of the Rally Fighter. So if you want to build a Rally Fighter in your garage, well, you have everything that you need available there. But today, when you come to build your ratifier here at the microfactory, well, you pay for the hardware, you pay for the training, and you pay for the access to the tools to build your cars. So this is how we generate revenue for the company and are sustainable. So for the moment, we have one microfactory, and you're in this one, yes. We're planning on opening a lot more, about 100 within 10 years. And we're also planning to expand the number of vehicles that we're doing.
So being a maker isn't just about electronics. It's about seeing things that don't work as well as they could and learning how to fix them. So I have this old chicken coop which I inherited with the house, and we have 8 chickens, and it's not big enough. You know, that's one of the problems, because we travel a lot and we have to leave the chickens locked up. But more than that, if you come in, you'll see that it's a pretty messy place, and it's not that well designed, because the chickens roost up on the post, and then they poop down into the nesting boxes where they lay the eggs. So that was clearly a bad design. So if you look at the design of the new coop I'm building, first of all, it's got a wire mesh bottom, so when they're roosting, the poop will just fall down through the mesh down into the area down below where it's a lot easier to clean. And the nesting boxes have been pushed to the outside of the coop, so there's no chance that the chickens will basically do their business where they're also laying the eggs. It's also a lot of little details. You know, we had problems with rats, so we've got some, you know, rats can actually squeeze through chicken wire like that, but they can't squeeze through hardware cloth. So little fixes, we put hardware cloth a couple of feet down so they couldn't tunnel under. You know, you think about how do you solve problems, and it's that sort of engaging designing in a way that makes something work. That's the essence of making. It's not that you use electronics.
Millions of entrepreneurs were able to come up with very effective and simple solutions using very limited resources. You know, what we call in the US the MacGyver spirit, you know, which is the ability to come up with a makeshift solution when you have nothing except, you know, duct tape and your Swiss Army knife.
We needed to figure out a way to have tempt draw again. His eyes were the only muscle that he could move, so we created something that worked within that. One, he was going to be able to talk through a machine, and 2, that he was going to be able to do his art again. The iWriter we made for under $100. Today, I made iWriters in my 9-year-old son's classroom, and the total cost of those devices were under $10. And by doing that, I don't think it's going to instantly change the medical industry overnight, but as you reduce the cost of goods sold, you have the potential to make things more affordable for people.
For me, this represents kind of the jugaad or the maker spirit. And jugaad is a Hindi word that means an improvised solution born from ingenuity and cleverness. Some interesting entrepreneurs in India. One of them, his name is Mansukh Prajapati. He actually has created, in my opinion, the world's greenest fridge made entirely of clay. It consumes no electricity and it's 100% biodegradable. Keep fruits and vegetables fresh for 5 days, and it costs only about $25 or $30. So the maker movement is not only spreading across 50 states in the US, but it's now spreading also in other countries. And particularly in Europe, especially in the western part of Europe, are very affected by the economic crisis. The governments in Europe, in France, Spain, and Italy, are closely looking at the maker movement and are beginning to support and fund the growth of this movement as well.
I think that the maker movement represents power shifting to the individual and power to the people, then I guess you could call it a revolution. That has to lead to a cataclysmic shift of how economies work.
When you're in the middle of something, it's very, very hard to see what the larger arc of the story is. Say, we are here, and if you step back a year or two, you'll get a slightly larger perspective, but if you step back 50 or 500 or even 5,000 years, then you can see this larger pattern.
And I think the idea here today that we kind of see in the maker movement and what we see perhaps in web development in some of the earlier phases is relatively small groups of people can have big impact. You don't necessarily need the world's largest company behind you. You don't need a huge lab.
We now recognize that a transformative set of tools are now in the hands of regular people. We've seen it happen once with a personal computer. We've seen it happen again with the web. We know that when you put powerful tools in the hands of regular people, they change the world. That moment has happened now with manufacturing, which is bigger than either of those two industries. And if the past is prologue, this is going to both create entirely new industries, products, and companies, but also transform the existing ones.
So today we look at some of the silly things that are coming out of the makers movement, or the frivolous things, or things that are just fun. And we say, what are the consequences of this? And probably, in the short term, the consequences, the implications are very, very modest. And maybe they will go nowhere, and it will be a fashion that fades. But what if it doesn't? And can we extrapolate, what if it takes off and becomes a new model? And that's the kind of thing I think we also want to be watching for, listening for, and trying to imagine.